You mentioned two problems there that are essential to being successful on LinkedIn. First, they didn't hook you. Those first two lines of that copy are the most important parts of the post. And if you don't write a good hook, you're not going to hook them. And then the next thing is the wall of text. People don't like a wall of text, and most people are looking at it on mobile, and it just looks like one big frame of text if you write in paragraph form. So you really have to ditch everything you learned in high school and college comp classes and ignore what your composition teacher taught you about paragraph structure, because it's one sentence per paragraph on LinkedIn because you have such a narrow window when they're on mobile. And it's something between 65 and 70% of all visits to LinkedIn are on mobile devices. So you really have to structure things for mobile first and break it up and get white space and let it breathe. Let the content breathe. Give people the ability to scan it. Let's define thought leadership. I'm going to define it a little differently. I'm not talking about your TED Talk subject. You can be a thought leader without being somebody big enough to go do a TED Talk. I view the biggest value of thought leadership and sharing content and sharing ideas is your ability to get in the weeds with your customer. You can either be the thought leader that's up in the helicopter saying, okay, you're about 30 miles away, turn left now. And they're looking at a cliff going, wait, I can't turn left. Or you can be the guide who's out there in front of them with your big sickle and you're just like cutting your way through and leading them to their destination. Or you're behind them and they're doing it, but you're back going, angle your elbow this way and, do it that way and you'll get more grass. You can be one of those two roles, but the point is that you're in the weeds with them. If we can be that kind of guide, that's the thought leadership that builds trust with our target audience. He says the shortest story ever written was this one. And I just want you to think about this as I tell the story. The queen died. The king died of a broken heart. If you think about how much of that story did you just write in your own mind? Did you even almost get tears as you thought about the king dying?
I see. Yes, it's more about like how the mind sort of projects parts into it and imagines fleshes out the rest of the story. Welcome to the Tech Marketing Masters podcast, where we interview CMOs and VPs of marketing in tech to give you an inside look at what other tech marketing executives are up to, what's working in marketing these days, what you can try with your team, and how to level up your marketing game. I'm your host, Lee Cooper, co-founder and CEO of Cooper. We're an SEO marketing agency that helps tech companies grow their organic search traffic. And today I'm joined by Candyce Edelen, CEO of PropelGrowth, which teaches an authentic human-to-human approach to social selling that demonstrates your expertise and builds trust. Today, we explore a lot of really great insights like how your audience actually reads your posts on LinkedIn and the kind of content that the LinkedIn algorithm is actually trying to promote, the importance of accessibility and how surprisingly widespread disabilities actually are, some of the hidden benefits of engaging with small niche influencers, and a strategic approach to building relationships with them, a completely different approach to crafting your thought leadership posts, and why your thought leadership should not be your next big TED Talk or manifesto, how your readers experience your storytelling and project themselves into your stories, and finally, the fatal flaw of the predictable revenue model that actively damages your sales pipeline, and a new approach to social selling that builds you up as a trusted advisor early in your buyer's journey. If you're interested in any of these things, then you definitely don't want to miss this episode. Candyce, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
I guess just for the people, who may not have heard of you before, I'm curious if you could just give a quick introduction of yourself, kind of where you came from, and then maybe like, how did you get into marketing? Sort of what have you done there?
So I'm a bit of a serial entrepreneur. It's an incurable illness, just a FYI. So I founded or co-founded a couple of fintech financial technology companies before PropelGrowth. And we were focused on the securities trading industry. So like stocks and bonds and the electronic trading, kind of the infrastructure that enables that. So built a couple of companies that brought that to market and some pretty category creating products. And one of them was relatively successful. We made the Deloitte and Touche Fast 50 list, in 2004, and then started the second one in 2005. And then that one didn't do so well. So I left that and started PropelGrowth in 2007, really focusing on providing marketing consulting services and go-to-market strategy for similar companies, people that were kind of in that same target audience as us, as what we had been, and was pretty successful with that. So we built that over a number of years. And in our first 10 years doing it, we actually shepherded 13 of our clients toward very successful exits. So that kind of got us, because we were successful at that, we got a lot of inbound leads from referrals, and I was publishing content on the trade publications in that space and had kind of built a name for myself there. So we didn't really do any outbound sales for like 10 years. And then my partner, who is also my husband, and I decided that we really wanted to move in a different direction. A lot of the beneficiaries of what we were serving was hedge funds, and I just kind of just wanted to move away from serving hedge funds to serving parts of the economy that actually contribute instead of just taking. Um, and so we moved into commercial real estate because it was tangentially related to what we were already doing. We had developed some unusually unusual ways of approaching content and things like that. And I figured that some of the strategies would work the same in commercial real estate. They were trying to solve problems that we had solved in the electronic trading business. And so I started doing a lot of outreach on LinkedIn for that, mostly because I don't want to cold call. And so I started using LinkedIn to avoid having to spend my life cold calling, which I just don't want to do. I respect people who are good at it. I'm not. And I wasn't going to do like a bunch of cold spammy emails either. So I had to figure out a way to drive sales, or if we don't sell, we don't eat. So, so we went down that path, and it was after a little bit of trial and error, I found an approach on LinkedIn that was remarkably successful for reaching out to that audience. To the tune of booking 125 sales calls in 6 months by myself. So we did that for a while. Commercial real estate turned out to not be a particularly resilient market to COVID. So we needed to pivot once again when lockdown happened. And I had done a webinar in 2019 about this approach I was using on LinkedIn to get those 125 sales calls. I mean, it was just warm human to human outreach. And so I had done this webinar, and somebody saw the webinar and reached out to me in 2020 saying, "Oh gosh, would you please train our team how to do this?" And so I did. And then another company asked me to train their resellers. And so we did that. And then we decided to create the course that is now called Prospecting Mastery on the back of that, just teaching our methodology. So since then, we've shifted into more LinkedIn training and helping people leverage LinkedIn as a mechanism for getting thought leadership and content out there to build human to human relationships and book sales calls.
Yeah, I mean, that's all. That's a great, backstory, beginning, middle, and end there. Um, and to me personally, like I think a lot of people listening to this, a lot of them are, B2B tech, and like LinkedIn is a tricky platform, at least from what I've seen, because when we think of social media, we think of like the consumer social media. You think of like Facebook and Twitter and YouTube and this kind of stuff. But like in B2B, I really see it as like LinkedIn mostly. Every now and then I see some social on like YouTube or Instagram, depending on the type of product, like if it's very visual. But most of the time it's like, if you're talking about B2B social, it seems like it's LinkedIn, and everybody kind of knows they should be on LinkedIn. And yet very few people, I think, actually crack that code. I certainly haven't. I've posted things I'm probably embarrassed to say this, but like about a year, maybe 2 years with absolutely no traction whatsoever. But I do what most people do. I post things and I make sure that the lights look like they're on, right?
Mhm.
And it's I think a lot of people, like, LinkedIn is just not something they know how to crack. They know that it's like supposed to be something they do it, they don't really get traction, especially from a marketing perspective, or the salespeople abuse it in some way where they just like they slam people, with pitches, and you're like, get out of my inbox.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
It's
Block,
so, yeah.
block.
Yeah, exactly. It's a tough one, and it's kind of a weird platform from what I understand, because like, I think of a lot of those other platforms as being there to get engagement and connect people. But from what I gather with LinkedIn, there's a little bit of another incentive on selling to hiring. There's a little bit of an incentive for that platform to sell to sales teams. And then there's also like the community engagement. And so it doesn't totally act like the other social platforms from what I've seen.
Right.
It's kind of a weird beast. But you seem to have like really figured that one out. And I'm just curious, like, in terms of what you see other people, posting out there and what they're doing with LinkedIn, what would you say is like the number one thing that people are struggling with, or possibly doing wrong, if you will?
I think it's two things, and I really like the way that you articulated that posting to show that the lights are still on. I've never heard it said that way, and that's a really well articulated explanation of the problem. So LinkedIn started as a resume repository, and that's the way a lot of people treat it today is, so there's those people who treat it like a resume repository, say that 3 times fast, um, and haven't updated their resume in the last 20 years. Then there's people who treat it like, an ad platform for free ads, and that's, that was, like, how it evolved. So back in, I don't know, 2007, 2008, 2009, we all kinda discovered that you could post, put your blog post together, and then you could write, like, a promotional post that promoted the blog post and put that up on Twitter and LinkedIn and Facebook, and all of those were really effective at driving traffic to your blog, and that was the whole point. You were using these platforms to drive traffic, and then HubSpot figured out how to auto post every time you published a blog, and auto post to groups, and that killed groups because groups became like a place where people just auto posted and nobody ever visited. Um, and that worked for a while to drive traffic to websites, but in the last, I don't know, maybe 7, 8 years, LinkedIn has become much more of a social community, and you see a lot more engagement, and that's just going up and up and up in terms of the kind of engagement that people are doing on there, and you're seeing more people come to LinkedIn with the purpose of learning. They wanna, and learning in quick snippets. The average visit to LinkedIn is less than 3 minutes. And they're looking at between 7 and 13 posts in those 3 minutes. So you can assume that the average post view time is 7 seconds. So people are kind of scrolling pretty quickly because social media has trained us to just scroll, scroll, scroll. And so what we've learned now is that if you really want to get your posts viewed and you want to get the algorithm to put your content out there, you have to really pay attention to the human behavior that's happening on the platform now, and that's engagement. So you see people liking and commenting and getting whole conversations going on LinkedIn, and you can learn a lot from just kind of scrolling and read the post and then read the whole dialogue of conversations that are going on. Well, LinkedIn is leaning into that, and people are leaning into it. So it's a human behavior and an algorithm behavior that are kind of coexisting to create this environment where more engagement gets you more views. And so that posting to prove I'm still in business, the posting to promote your blog post, those don't get engagement because usually it's pretty much impossible. You read this, it's like super promotional. It's like, well, what can I say? Great post, And so that just doesn't get engagement. And then that tells the algorithm nobody's interested in it. So the algorithm stops sharing it because it can only put so much in your feed. If you've got 13 posts you're going to scroll through in your visit, well, how does it decide which 13? If you're like, I have over 6,000 connections. Which of those 6,000 connections is going to land in my feed if there's only 13? Well, it's got to decide what's going to be likely to be most interesting to me. And the engagement is a huge contributor to that. If it's going to decide, okay, Candace is interested in marketing concepts, interested in predictable revenue, interested in supporting the Microsoft ecosystem, these are the types of posts I'm going to put in Candace's feed because it's what she engages with. So if you're posting on something that's not relevant to that, or if you're posting in a way that doesn't get any engagement, the algorithm's going to go, oh no, she's not interested in that, and it's not going to show up in my feed. So you have to be strategic about how you use LinkedIn if you want to show up in the right people's feeds.
Yeah, that you have so much knowledge in that so quickly. And what's also interesting to me is like I'm coming from SEO, and I'm about to go off on a tangent. So like bring me back in a little while. But
Tangent away.
yeah, it's one of these things where it's interesting to me how all these platforms end up evolving in similar ways because like what I tell people about SEO is like too many SEOs are chasing the algorithm, but what they're not realizing is that the algorithm is chasing human behavior, right? It
Right.
just needs like people like Google exists because people have questions and Google needs to like provide the answer and that's it.
Right.
And
Well,
it's like,
to sell ads because they need money.
yeah, that as well. But it is one of these things where it's like, stop chasing the algorithm, chase the humans. And now you're going in the same direction as the algorithm. You're skating where the puck is going.
Yeah, you're collaborating rather than competing with the algorithm or trying to game the algorithm.
Exactly. But a lot of SEOs traditionally kind of see themselves in this like adversarial relationship with Google and like, how do I beat the algorithm? How do I trick the algorithm? And I'm like, no, you're not tricking or beating anything. You're trying to help people find what they're looking for, which is what Google's trying to do. And at that point, you're friends. The algorithm wants to pick you up. And, there's only so many results that Google can show, at the very top. It's got to rank that somehow. And the major way that they figure out the rankings is, are people clicking? Are people
Right.
clicking? Are they engaging?
And are they staying, right? I
Yeah.
mean, abandonment affects that, I would imagine.
Yeah. And so like, there are concepts of like, are people clicking? What's the dwell time? Do they bounce back? Do they click the next search result? But it's all engagements basically. And most of that is like click data. And we're now figuring out that maybe Chrome has this whole time been spyware to see how people are engaging with pages because
Okay,
Chrome
if
can
we didn't assume that, then we're just naive.
Yeah, and that's always been the thing, but now that they've had those Google leaks, it's kind of like, yeah, it's pretty clear, It's like we all should have known, but
We are the product.
yeah, exactly. But you're saying very similar things when it comes to LinkedIn's algorithm. It's like once upon a time you posted stuff and you could just like basically rank because you posted anything at all. But over time, the algorithm is chasing that human engagement. You need to chase the human engagement, and that's where like it's going to be measured on engagement because they only have so much real estate. They're going to
Right.
rank it basically by what's working.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that because clicks and dwell time and reactions and comments are the things that drive LinkedIn's algorithm. So, I mean, you lose the comment part on Google, but the dwell time is super important, and it's important on LinkedIn too. So probably the algorithms, I mean, they're very different, but at the end of the day, they're kind of trying to accomplish the same thing.
Yeah, it's weird because there's like a convergent evolution towards the same things, but then like the details are very different. I mean, like Google actually did try this thing where people could comment on search results
Oh
and like
yeah, I
leave
remember
notes.
that.
Yeah, and I was kind of like, yeah, I don't think that's gonna stick.
Well, it's too easy to manipulate.
Yeah, and it just didn't feel very much like a search result thing. But obviously on LinkedIn, like comments, that is a big deal that you don't have on search. But the main thing still being like it's got to engage. It's
Yeah. Well, the same thing is on podcast. If you want to lift a podcast, you got to get engagement. You got to get plays and you got to get likes and you got to get reviews. Like those are the things that lift it. It's engagement.
yeah, and it's like too many people get stuck on how do I trick the algorithm, and it's like, nah, that's just the means. The end is how do I engage with people. And that's the whole point of marketing and sales is like you're trying to reach people, but somehow along the way we lost sight of that, and we're too busy working the technology to actually talk to people. And you have that emphasis on like human and that sort of thing.
Yeah, we really lean into the human to human because it just makes a difference. In fact, one of the things that I coach our clients, so we do a 30-day posting challenge where we help our clients really lean into learning how to post on LinkedIn. And one of the things that I teach them is when you're sitting down to write that post, and this true is with email too, when you're sitting down to write that post, pretend that your favorite client or prospect is sitting in front of you and that you're writing it for them as if you're speaking it to them. The more they hear your voice spoken, the more they're going to connect with you. But also, the more you're writing to an individual, the more approachable you will feel and the more human connection you'll get from that writing. And so it's made a difference for most of our members to have that kind of framework in place.
Yeah, no, that's really good advice. It's almost like if you could see yourself sitting across from like your exact person or persona at the very least, and you're writing directly to them, you're gonna bring out that life and that human connection rather than like, oh, this is a keyword I should put in or something like that.
Right. And I mean, keywords still matter because people do use LinkedIn to search, not like they use YouTube and Google, but they do search. And so there's a value to that. But most people are going to find your content because the algorithm put it in their feed. Or, well, yeah, because the algorithm put them in their feed is almost always sometimes notifications, but I think most people find it there. And so, if you can spark conversation, then when people see it in the feed and see that there's, 35 comments, they're more likely to go read the post and read the comments because it's obvious this sparked engagement. And, it's like the FOMO thing. Oh, wait, what am I missing out on this post? This looks interesting. I'll go read this.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I know when I'm like mindlessly scrolling through LinkedIn, that's always like the immediate eye catcher is just like, oh man, this thing got like 3,000 engagements. Like this must be a big deal. And then you see the other ones where I don't know, the ones that get me the most are you read it, the first thing doesn't catch your eye, you hit the read more, you get hit with a wall of text, and then you look at the bottom and it's like two likes, and you're kind of like, am I really going to spend this much time to read that post? You know what I mean?
Well, and you mentioned 2 problems there that are essential to being successful on LinkedIn. In that example, first, they didn't hook you. So most people aren't gonna see read more, click read more because the hook wasn't effective. Those first 2 lines of that copy are the most important parts of the post, and if you don't write a good hook, you're not going to hook them, obviously. And then the next thing is the wall of text. People don't like a wall of text, and most people are looking at it on mobile, and it just looks like one big frame of text if you write in paragraph form. So you really have to ditch everything you learned in high school and college comp classes and ignore what your composition teacher taught you about paragraph structure because really it's one sentence per paragraph on LinkedIn because you have such a narrow window when they're on mobile. And it's something between 65 and 70% of all visits to LinkedIn are on mobile devices. So you really have to structure things for mobile first and break it up and get white space and let it breathe. Let the content breathe. Give people the ability to scan it. That said, please do not use special fonts. So different post-publishing tools out there will let you do bold and italic, and people think that they're so smart by using these special fonts. Well, what you have just done is made your content unsearchable because those fonts are Unicode. They're not text. It's not like rich text format that is the case in most websites or other tools. It's not HTML, it's Unicode. And so you run into 2 problems. One, search can't search it. And I think more important from the human to human perspective is if anybody in your audience has some sort of a visual disability or impairment where they're using a screen reader, they can't read your freaking headlines. And that's usually the most important part of your copy. And it's just gobbledygook. And from what I understand from friends who use screen readers, they just sort of freeze and they don't read the rest of your post either. So please don't use that. I get a little irritated with that. I try to talk people out of it, and you'd be surprised at how many people go, so what, and move on.
Yeah, that is always one where like the accessibility thing, people are like, "Oh, well, that's only a couple percentage point." I think I'm guilty of having said something like that at one point of like, "Oh, well, accessibility that only affects like some percentage of people." But the thing is like when you have, especially with a LinkedIn post, all you have to do is just write normal text.
And you use all caps to create your headings. It's not hard. Yeah.
Yeah, and you're kind of like ditching some people there.
And are you okay, so let's address that it's only 2% of the population. That's actually not true. First of all, 24% of the population has a disability. Now, it doesn't mean they all have a vision disability, but 24% of our population has a disability and needs some form of accessibility support. And then from vision disabilities, it's not just people that are blind or have such a severe vision impairment that they can't see. It's also people that have processing disorders where they don't process the written word. Maybe they have dyslexia. Do you know what percentage of the population has dyslexia?
Yeah, that's a lot higher. It's a
It's
lot
a
more common.
lot higher. Yeah. And so, but what you're saying, I'm sorry, I'm not saying this to you, but somebody in this audience really needs to hear this right now. What you're saying when you say, I don't care, is that you're saying that those people don't matter and that they're irrelevant to you. And I just think we need to be kinder and more human because guess what? We have something like a 60% likelihood that in sometime in our lives we will be disabled, or maybe it might be higher than 90%. So eventually somebody's going to be saying that to you.
Yeah.
Okay,
Uh,
I will get off of that.
I triggered a whole thing there.
I was very triggered. I follow Meryl Evans, who is a phenomenal accessibility expert, and one of my closest friends is blind. And so I'm much more aware of the issues, and I still flub it up half the time, but I'm trying to be more aware.
Yeah. I mean, from my perspective, I think one of the hardest parts with the accessibility thing, and I know we're kind of getting away from LinkedIn. It's kind of a greater thing, but I think the most painful part to me is like I think we all know we should make websites and things like that more accessible. And like no one would argue against it, but the problem is always like, well, I could take like say for my website, I could take, X number of developer hours to spend it on something that, affects basically everybody and create my new fancy web page, or I can spend those developer hours doing it on this like really obscure accessibility thing that my CEO is never going to see. And so it's like, oh, well, in the trade-off, I think that's when people make the decision like, oh, well, it's better for me to spend resources on, basically a majority, which no one likes doing that. But if they only have a certain amount of budget or developer hours in the month or whatever, it makes sense from a Machiavellian perspective. And it's hard to get the time or the resources back in to say, hey, accessibility does matter. Let's cover that too. It's not, let's not forget these people, basically. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah, I agree. And accessibility is a much bigger issue than vision impairment. There's so many other things that play into it. But at least on LinkedIn, we can be accessible by just not using special fonts. It's not
Yeah.
bad.
Yeah. It's pretty easy. It's just like use the characters.
Yeah, use special fonts and add closed captions on your videos. That's all. And LinkedIn makes that pretty easy too. So like we can be accessible on LinkedIn.
Yeah. I think that one's pretty easy and doable. But yeah, I mean, so I think we went through a few things there. But I mean, yeah, I mean, I'm in the camp of people where, I post, I don't know, like 2 times a week. I show that the
Mhm.
lights are on. Some people who are close to me are kind enough to pretend to like what I post, and I get a few engagements, that kind of thing. I suspect there's a lot of people out there who are in some version of that.
Yeah, yeah, that's most people on LinkedIn. But I'll give you one bit of encouragement. You're actually in the top 0.3% of LinkedIn users because you're posting. Only 0.3% of LinkedIn users post regularly.
That is actually because I remember a long time ago some statistic from Facebook. It was something like 97% of people just lurk, and then some like really small percentage of people they just comment or like reply or something, and then there's an even tiny like little percentage of people who actually post like at all. And it's just it's more than that 80-20 rule. It's like a 1 to 99 rule in a way. It's
Exactly.
really extreme.
And you have to remember also that, we see a lot of stuff in our feeds, but when we're targeting a given audience, there's not that many other people targeting that same audience. So it really is an unusual opportunity compared to like trying to rank on Google. It's easier to rank because LinkedIn is a platform of niches. And so if you get good at getting engagement from your target niche, that's a key element. We teach an influencer strategy to start to borrow audiences and I'm not talking like Kim Kardashian or Seth Godin. I'm talking about smaller influencers that your target prospects are following and engaging with. And by targeting those people and engaging with their content, commenting on their content, and giving like meaningful comments, you can start to attract those people over to your posts and start to build relationships with those people. And so you want to be really intentional about who you're commenting on. Don't let the algorithm decide that for you based on what's in the feed. You want to go be intentional. But when you do that, you can start to attract your ideal audience over to you. And that's a way to really build the right people. Because getting your friends, like I can get my mom to go like and engage with my content, but that's not going to accomplish anything if I'm trying to reach owners of tech firms. No diss on my mom, but she couldn't barely turn on her computer. So
Yeah, yeah. And I mean that's pretty clever. Like it makes so much sense that you already have these influencers, they know your niche, they have that audience. So just be part of that community and then you can kind of gently channel some of that audience into your space because you're in the same space basically.
right.
You're
Exactly.
a fellow traveler there. So, engage with the influencers in your niche and you're getting to their audience, which is your audience.
And this is it's an important aspect of this. We say we're trying to funnel them over, but we're not stealing their audience. In fact, the interesting thing is that every time you drop a comment on one of those target influencers' posts, you're actually lifting their post. You're actually helping them out because a comment. Richard Vanderblom does this research on the LinkedIn algorithm every year, and he estimates that each comment results in about a 5% lift of that post to the poster's audience and about a 2.8% lift in your audience. So when you comment, yes, you're doing yourself a favor, but you're also doing the poster a huge favor. And then you get to take advantage of some of the culture of reciprocity that exists on LinkedIn, where if you go to, and this doesn't work so well with the big influencers, you're not going to get Seth Godin to come and comment on your posts, but somebody who's got 10, 20,000 followers and is getting 20 to 30 comments on their posts, they're going to see you. And if you keep commenting on their posts, they're going to be more likely, I'm not saying it's 100%, it's not a quid pro quo, but they're more likely to, one, see your posts in their feed. And if they do, to comment on it. And some of them will even go seek you out, go check out your profile, see what you're posting, and drop a comment intentionally just to be to be kind and thank you. So that strategy, we call it our influencer strategy at Propel Growth. And that really pays off to grow audience and build relationships with these influencers. I've developed really strong relationships with some of these influencers, and we've ended up then doing joint venture things where we do a joint event and they've got a bigger list than me. So they promote it to their list. I bring the content. And that kind of stuff can be really, really powerful, all because I started building a relationship with them by commenting on their stuff on LinkedIn.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. It comes back to, again, you're building relationships, not posting to
Exactly.
LinkedIn.
Human to human.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, but that does take us to another topic I know you wanted to talk about. You got to have something to post because none of this works if you don't have something meaningful to post.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess on that topic, I mean, a lot of people, at least from what I guess, they either post, hey, my company just released a feature, come like this post, right? It's like extremely self promotional, or you
Or I
get,
just put up this blog post.
yeah, I just published a blog post. Here's a link to it. Occasionally you get the stuff of like, hey, I just came back from this event and I saw some great people. And then they have pictures of people in suits and that kind of thing. That's okay. I don't engage with it much, but for the people who are there, I'm sure it has some engagement. But and then there's the thought leadership end of the spectrum. And, for me, I get my creative juices going, and then I'm sure I go talk about things that no one cares about, and then I post it to the world and hope that someone out there cares. The kind of publish and pray, I think they call it sometimes. And I get the feeling that might not be the optimal strategy. I'm wondering, like, what do you see people doing on the thought leadership front that may or may not be working?
Okay, so first of all, let's define thought leadership. I'm going to define it a little differently than most people would. I'm not talking about your TED Talk subject. You can be a thought leader without being somebody big enough to go do a TED Talk or even having a big enough idea to do a TED Talk. What I view the biggest value of thought leadership and sharing content and sharing ideas, sharing how to on LinkedIn or any platform for that matter, is your ability to get in the weeds with your customer. In fact, my partner Phil and I were just talking about it because we're getting ready to do a talk on thought leadership as a team sport. And we were talking about, you can be the thought leader that's up in the hell, you've got your client and they're in the bush and they're trying to bushwhack through and get to their destination and they don't know where they're going and they don't know how to handle the scythe. And so you can either be the thought leader that's up in the helicopter saying, okay, you're about 30 miles away, turn left now. And they're looking at a cliff going, wait, I can't turn left. Or you can be the guide who's out there in front of them with your big sickle and you're just like cutting your way through and leading them to their destination and helping them get there. Or you're behind them, teaching them how to use the scythe or sickle. I don't know what's the right word. And they're doing it, but you're back going, angle your elbow this way and, do it that way and you'll get more grass. You can be one of those two roles, but the point is that you're in the weeds with them. You're down in the grass. You understand what they're dealing with and you're helping them cope with it. It's like, nope, don't step that way. There's a cliff. Wait, that's a snake. Back up. If we can be that kind of guide, that's the thought leadership that builds trust with our target audience. And so you don't need to have the big earth-shattering Elon Musk style manifesto that you're trying to share out there. You're trying to help people in the weeds. I'll give an example. So in the Microsoft world, there's this product, an ERP product, enterprise resource planning. So it's like this back-end product that runs their whole business. And a lot of small manufacturers and distributors and other types of companies that are, between 50 and 200 employees are on this older platform called Great Plains that Microsoft bought in 2001. And they run their whole business on this. Their business is not tech. They're not usually tech savvy companies, but they're running a successful business. They got a lot of people on payroll. They've got to make things and do things that make money. And now Microsoft is ending support for Great Plains, and they're having a lot of oh crap moments right now. So you can be the guy in the helicopter who's talking about, oh, you just need to switch over to Business Central and that'll solve all your problems. Or you can be the bushwhacker in the weeds saying, yeah, I know you've got like these 5 features that are running your workflow that GP does and BC doesn't do. So let's talk about how we're going to make those work in Business Central so you can move to a more modern platform that's ultimately going to be a whole lot more secure for you and run your business more efficiently. But we got to get these particular weeds handled, and I will show you how we do it, and then actually show it and walk it through. And that might be like a whole, series of posts over several months time. But the more you're sharing of those insights and the how-tos, the more you're building trust with this target audience that's trying to figure out how the heck they're going to keep their business going while they completely rip out their entire infrastructure, technologically speaking. That's how you win trust.
Yeah. No, that's really interesting because I mean, I think it's what I see, or at least maybe this is what I do, is I get all inspired about like, oh, this is a topic I want to write about, right? And then I want to blast out. But that's coming from a perspective of what I find interesting, not it's coming from me pitching a solution, and it's not coming from the audience and like the problem they're facing today. Like they've got a brick wall in front of them. They don't know how to get around it. And you're talking about, the next 5 years, AI is going to do all this stuff and all this stuff. That's really great, but they have a brick wall in front of them. That's the thing that they're trying to solve. And if you start from that perspective,
it's like being the GPS that doesn't know that the road is closed. And
oh
it's
yeah,
it's like you're stuck and it doesn't give you any alternatives. It's like,
yeah, yeah, exactly. So it's like being there, like starting with the problem they're facing right now, and then working through it with them is a lot more powerful than the big, 10,000 foot level TED Talk style thing.
exactly. The TED Talk might get attention, but it's in the weeds where you gain trust. And then I hear a lot of people go, well, yeah, but every one of those, let's go back to that Microsoft example, everybody's implementation of GP and their special workflows are different. And that's true. But I've also found that in most of those cases, if you will tell the unique story, other people will discover their story in that. So, tell you a story to describe this. When we were doing marketing consulting, people would, a prospect would ask me, well, tell me more about what you do. And so I would tell them about our recent client, because usually we were really serving within a niche. So the recent clients usually were pretty applicable to the next client. And I would tell them like a story about a specific problem we're helping that client solve. And invariably, the prospect would go, oh my gosh, I have exactly that same problem. And then they would proceed to tell me about their problem, and it was pretty much totally unrelated to the problem I had described. And I was always scratching my head about that until I realized that we're wired for story, and we discover our own stories in the listening and the hearing of a story. It's why in the Bible, you see all of these really specific stories and metaphors, and we can discover like this whole big overarching truth from this story about a person that lost their sheep or something like that, and so I've really learned that the specificity isn't a risk, it's actually an advantage.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. Just the ability for you to tell a story and then people kind of find a way to project themselves into it, which,
Yeah,
you know,
exactly.
in many ways that's kind of like that is like the magic of storytelling, is that you're kind of creating this, I guess you're simulating an experience in somebody else's mind. And so they are experiencing it as if, it's actually happening, when in fact it could be fiction. It could be, just a secondhand story, but they are experiencing it in the first person like it's them. And it's amazing how often they can kind of find a protagonist that they are, they project themselves into, and then it becomes like real for them. And if it's even closely, in their ballpark, it's amazing how often people are like, "Oh yeah, that's the problem I'm having." And so I have similar situations in SEO where I'm kind of like, "Sure, that's your problem. I think it's actually completely different, but I'm going to roll with this."
I'll
Yeah,
just go with this. Don't tell them they're wrong. Just move with it.
exactly. And then just kind
Yeah.
of let them talk through, what they think their problem is, and then sort of adjust to that. But yeah, I mean, it is amazing how much like it comes down. It sounds like down in the details sort of storytelling, and it's not the big TED talk, and it doesn't sound as fascinating from a writing perspective, and yet from the audience's perspective, that's what they're going through, or they see themselves going through it.
Yeah, exactly. They see themselves. Um, uh, I taught a storytelling workshop with a former professor of mine, he is kind of old, but I always say my old writing professor. And I'm like, sorry, John. But we reconnected after I sent him an email when I moved back to Fort Collins that said, you were my professor 27 years ago. And remarkably, he remembered me, probably having a lot to do with a story that I wrote for his class after I had gone to India and have observed a cremation on the shore of the Ganges River, and described human flesh as smelling like a barbecue.
I don't think I'm going to be able to forget that.
Yeah, yeah. That might be why you remember. um, it was true. Anyway, so we got together and we've reconnected and become really good friends since then. And he had no experience in business, didn't even know what the word B2B meant. But I got him to go with me to teach a storytelling workshop at a B2B MX, the big B2B marketing conference, a few years ago. And we did a workshop, and he talks about storytelling. He's so brilliant at teaching this stuff. And he says the shortest story ever written was this one. And I just want you to think about this as I tell the story. The queen died. The king died of a broken heart.
That's the whole.
That's the whole story.
That's interesting. Like, how many words is that even?
It's like 5 words, I think, or something like that. The queen died.
It's like 10.
The king died of a broken heart. So what is that? I can't count. 9 words.
Yeah.
But if you think about how much of that story did you just write in your own mind? Did you even almost get tears as you thought about the king dying?
I see. I say it's more about like how the mind sort of projects parts into it and imagines fleshes out the rest of the story.
Yeah. My mind goes to the Taj Mahal, that was built as a tomb for the king's wife. And then he was building one on the other side of the river for himself, and he died before he finished it. That's the story that I tell in my mind when I hear that story. I bet you that's not the story you told in your mind.
Yeah. Yeah, that is interesting. And I'm sure everyone who listens to that, they're going to visualize it a little bit differently. They're going to hear it a little differently. And yet at the same time, they fleshed it out. Like they
Yeah,
told themselves the story, even though it's basically like 2 plot points in a way.
right. Yeah. Yeah. With just a little bit of emotion.
Yeah. Yeah. That is interesting. That gives me a little bit to meditate on there.
Isn't that fascinating?
Yeah.
So going back to thought leadership, I think that we need to pull story in and tell the stories of our clients. And you don't have to tell their names. You don't have to disclose anything that would cause confidentiality issues. You just have to tell the story about, there once was this man who was trying to figure out how to get their site to rank. And we looked into their site and we realized that they didn't have H1 tags on any of their blogs. And we dug in and we started fixing the H1 tags, and suddenly they started to rank. And if, I might be fine with H1 tags, but if I know that you figured that out, it's going to help me trust that you can figure out the next problem. And then you tell a different story. And if you're telling these stories every day or every 2 to 3 days, more stories, LinkedIn lurkers are a real thing, and they're very important. LinkedIn lurkers, most people on LinkedIn are lurking. These are the people who scroll through, they read your post, and they move on without ever indicating they were there. I get messages pretty much every week. I'll get 2 or 3 messages from people where they'll send me a connection request, and I'll send them a message saying, hey, thanks for the invitation to connect. What led you to reach out to me? And they'll say something to the effect of, I've been watching your posts for months and I need your help. Never liked anything, never engaged, but they've been watching. And that I find even in my business, and I teach LinkedIn for a living, almost 100% of our clients lurk for months, if not years, before they make themselves known. Um,
Yeah.
so if it's true of my clients who are trying to figure out how to use LinkedIn, it's more true of yours.
Yeah, I can see that. As you were saying that, I was like, I had some neurons firing there, and I have I probably won't articulate it very well, but I'm going to try. Right. One of the things I've just thought of was that like marketing and sales, the whole point is to help people take that customer journey, right, and to go through that journey. In many ways, what storytelling is helping people like psychologically simulate a journey. They're not actually doing it; they're just
But
experiencing it in
you're
their
funny.
minds.
Yeah.
But in some ways, like you're really, if you're doing the storytelling right for marketing and sales, you are telling that story so people can simulate what that customer journey looks like in a way before they're confident enough to actually take it. But they see it, they hear it, they feel it, they've done it, they've kind of like experienced it rather than us talking about the services and the features and the price and like all the stuff that kind of goes whoosh. Instead, they're like experiencing it firsthand, and then they go and they do it firsthand. You know what I mean?
It builds trust. You're absolutely right. You're steadily building trust with them, and when they trust you, people do business with people they trust. We talk about know, like, and trust. Well, they have to know who you are, obviously, but I don't think they actually have to like you. They need to trust you, because they could like you all day long, and they're not going to do business with you because they don't trust you. So when you're sharing this type of content, you're building their trust, and you're overcoming their fear of messing up, FOMO, because that's the main reason that people don't move forward. I think that's probably the biggest cause for no decision in a deal, is because not because they're afraid of not accomplishing something, but they're afraid that if they buy your stuff, it's not going to work and they're going to screw up their business. In that ERP example I was using, they're afraid that they're going to blow up the business or miss an order. I mean, it might not even be so big as blow up the business, but what if I miss an order? What if I don't get my orders placed to fulfill that client order? Or what if we're late? We've got these processes, and what if this process doesn't work right and something unexpected happens? How do I prevent that? And so all of your content for thought leadership should be feeding them confidence builders. It's like every post is a confidence pill, like, so that when they do reach out to you, they already trust you. Interestingly, we were talking a little bit about pitch slapping earlier. And are you familiar with the concept of the predictable revenue model?
I've heard of it, and somehow I've never gotten around to actually studying it.
Well, you've been the victim of it. I can pretty much guarantee you. Well, it was developed by Oracle. Wait, no, Salesforce, back in the early 2000s, like that decade. And basically what they were saying is, if you send a whole bunch of emails, you go buy a list and you create those sequences, and you have like kind of a prescribed way to write these sequences where you address a problem and you try to build trust, and you just send these 5 sequences or 10 sequences or whatever, you're going to have a predictable number of people who are going to engage with you and say, yeah, I want a meeting. And so the whole SDR model of hiring a whole bunch of recent college grads who don't know what they're talking about and assign them to go sell your stuff came out of this predictable revenue model. Well, that's gotten more and more difficult to execute on. And because so many hundreds of thousands of companies have leaned into it, we're all just getting spammed constantly with these people, and it's declining in effectiveness. But part of the reason that I think it doesn't work is because in any given market at any given period of time, only about, if you've got a target addressable market of 100 people, only 3 of those people are going to be in market to solve the problem that you help solve at any given time. 97% of the market may, well, if you've defined your market well enough, then they'll probably be in market eventually, but they're not right now. So this predictable revenue model and the spammy emails and stuff, then the pitch slapping that we're getting on LinkedIn is trying to basically target 100% of your target market in hopes that the little 3% will raise their hand. But in the process, you're alienating 97% of your target market while you're trying to find the 3%. And so what we're trying to do with the thought leadership is to build trust with 100% of the market and not alienate the 97%. The 3% are likely to find us. But what's fascinating to me is within this predictable revenue model and targeting the 3%, there's been research on B2B buying cycles repeatedly since about the first one that I noted and started paying attention to was around 2017. I think the CEB board, the corporate executive board, they're the ones that wrote the Challenger sale. They got bought by Gartner, so now it's Gartner, but they did buyer research. And it was around the time that they were coming out with the Challenger buyer or the Challenger customer. And then Rain Group and Forrester repeated similar studies where they went to buyers of technology or services that exceeded six figures that were six figures and above in purchases and surveyed them to figure out what drove the decisions to buy. And one of the most important things that came out of these studies is that 74% of buyers end up going with the vendor who originally helped them form the buying vision. Okay, so that's the people who were not in market and then came into market. The 3% who are already in market have a buying vision. And if you're just now targeting them, you're not that trusted advisor. Someone else has helped them shape that buying vision. So you're late to market with the 3% and alienating the 97%. You're really shooting yourself in the foot. And that's where becoming thought leaders and becoming those trusted advisor allows us to build the relationship with the customer and become much more it's like putting your finger on the scales, because it's a much higher likelihood that you're going to win the deal if you can come in and help shape the buying vision at the beginning.
Yeah. No, that really resonates though, because I'm just thinking of how I've made decisions before. It's not whoever spammed me in the last 3% of my buying journey, unless it was something where I was just looking for a transactional sale, or it was something that was cheap, or I needed it fast. In those cases, I might not need a whole buying vision. I'm I'll just grab something. But if it's something where you really need to see the process, whoever helped you through that process up front and gave you the vision, I can see why you'd trust that person through the entire rest of the process, even if you're not at that last 3% where you're ready to buy or in that stage. So that kind of resonates from a buying perspective. And it makes sense from a sales and marketing perspective as well.
Yeah, if you think about it, a lot of these people are trying to target intent data, right? Because the goal is to shorten the sales cycle. And so if we can get people who are already ready to buy, then the sales cycle feels shorter. But the buying cycle isn't shorter. It's just that you're entering the buying cycle late in that cycle. So if you're buying stuff off of Capterra or somewhere where they're doing their comparisons, well, they've already come to a vision for a category. And if they've come to that vision, then you may not, the vendor that shaped the buying vision may or may not have actually had a meeting with them. But something has shaped the vision so that they know that category is what they should be looking at.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think it's also very insightful to think that a lot of the predictable revenue model is not just focusing on that last 3%, but it's doing it at the expense of the other 97%, which is where you're creating those visions,
Right. So what we have to do is slow down in order to speed up results. And that's the thing that people have the hardest time buying into is that, yeah, we're going to have longer sales cycles if we get into the buying cycle early. But realistically, we have to think long term. Now, this is another problem, in my opinion, that I honestly think that this whole, I like to say the tech bros broke sales. or the SaaS bros, really, because they're the ones kind of leaning into this. But you get these SDRs and they're trained to think that this is a short-term job. And so they're not going to be around. And even the AEs, so for people that don't know, SDR, sales development rep, that's usually that junior level person who's cold calling and spamming you. And then you get the account executives who the SDR is supposed to book the meetings and find the qualified opportunities and then hand them over to the account executive to close. SDR time and job, I can't think of the word I'm looking for, tenure is like, 9 months. And so they're not going to be in the long-term nurture role because they don't care. They're going to change jobs. And AEs tend to only last about 18 months. So I think that the mindset has to change at the executive level, the founder level for the smaller companies. We're not going to change this mindset at an SDR level who doesn't believe they're going to be there. But this is a big thing for go-to-market strategy that companies need to be seriously thinking about, because the predictable revenue model is broken, and we're not going to fix it by, we just need to pour more leads down the funnel. And, now it's like they know they're going to get blocked for spam. So they go buy a whole bunch of disposable domains and redirect those domains, put up, 20, 30 disposable email addresses per domain so that they can spam more people. This is not solving the problem. More volume does not solve the problem of a strategy that doesn't work.
Yeah. It's like there's this weird mindset, I think, sometimes where people have like a brute force process. You know what I mean? It's very much brute force, just like run numbers through it. And then they just cram it really hard and they get into this mindset of like, well, it's not working, but if I just crammed it a little harder,
Yeah.
if I just worked a little faster, then suddenly I like break through to the other side and it would all start working or something. But the reality is often that's a sign that the process just kind of fails, or at least it's horribly inefficient. And then when you scale it, right, you scale that fail, if you will, and you just get failure at a larger scale. That's as to be expected, but that's like the mindset. And it does make sense what you're saying. Like if your SDRs aren't even for a year and an AE is there for 2 years, and then at least from what I've seen, VPs and CROs, even they are a little bit, I think they kind of get treated a little bit expendably by CEOs.
That's true.
It's like the whole sales department top to bottom gets treated like cannon fodder. And so they have to do short-term, tactics because they know there isn't a long-term anyways,
Yeah. So then the whole company ends up shooting themselves in the foot for that reason. And I like to call the whole program annoyance at scale.
Yeah, and it definitely feels that way, especially in the age of AI. I get more spam. It's not better spam, it's just more of it, And it's like, well, it didn't work on me the first time, and now it works, about at the same rate, which is not ever,
Yeah. And I got that one deal, and, there's always that. But yeah, I think that it's just going to get harder and harder to reach our customers. So that's why I'm teaching this thought leadership approach, and why we're leaning into LinkedIn and doing like the posting challenge that we've got one going on right now. And it's really fun to see the aha moments and to see people's reach go up, and to see, one person, we workshopped one of her posts and she tripled her average reach with just one post because of the way we workshopped it. But it's like we have to do things that will make us visible, because the pitch slapping isn't gonna get it done. And so we have to go with a go-to-market strategy that will actually work, not just try to scale something that doesn't work.
Yeah, that makes sense. Really quickly, I know we're at 1 hour. Are you good to keep going, or?
Well, I don't want to wear out our audience.
No, I think it's a really good conversation though, and it's one of those things where when it's a good conversation, people want more.
Yeah.
And usually, when it's a bad conversation, especially when I'm like hiring people, and I know it's a bad conversation when it gets to like 12 minutes and 30 seconds, and I'm like, where's the exit here? You know what I mean?
Right.
It's like,
Like,
I
are
don't
we done
know.
yet?
Yeah, I went through a hiring process earlier looking for somebody, and I was like, yeah, there's a magic time between 12 to 14 minutes when my brain is like, all right, where's the exit here? But
Right. My husband likes to say, use the method that Hollywood uses. Always leave them wanting more.
yeah, that works. I mean, how about this? Maybe if you have one really good story, since you're talking about, helping people kind of get to more of thought leadership and more of this human to human connection, maybe one really good story of someone you worked with and how you kind of worked them through that process and what that looked like. And then if they want more, then, they'll know where to find you.
All right. Let me think about that. That's a good question. So, I was working with a guy in the franchise space, who had been using automation to send out messages and try to book meetings. And in his defense, it was working. He was getting a couple of sales a month using this methodology. And I am super, super anti-bot, anti-pitch slapping, anti-automation on LinkedIn. You can automate like scheduling a post, but you need to be real when you're sending DMs and when you're commenting and when you're posting. And so I convinced this guy to dump the automation and go human to human on LinkedIn. And so he started posting videos of himself just talking through typical questions that his prospects ask. And all the videos are pretty short, and he posts them very regularly. And then he posts other things too, and he engages on LinkedIn. And you don't see a ton of engagement on his posts, but he's consistently closing more business. And this guy is like super metrics minded. So I really appreciate that because most of us aren't, and he's tracking everything. So he gave me a comparison between his performance in January of 22 when he was using automation and January of 23 when he had fully adopted our methodology. And I can't remember the exact numbers, although if you go to my profile, I talk about this case study in my profile. But by using the human to human strategies, he booked fewer meetings, but the meetings were better qualified. And so he had more conversions from first meeting to second meeting. And he has like this kind of process that he takes people through. And he closed 3 times as many deals at the end of January 22 over 23. I mean, sorry, the end over 23 was 3 times as many deals as 22. But the most important part was that he saved 43 hours in 1 month. So people always complain to me about, I don't have time to do human to human because I've got to reach out to so many people. Well, he reached out to fewer people, but because he was doing fewer qualified meetings, he tripled his sales and saved himself a full week of time. And it's gotten better since then. I need to go back to him and find out what it was in January 24 and what it is now in January 25, because I know that he's just consistently getting better at it. But, he's like, I got my life back by doing it this way.
Yeah, that's always the sign though that it's working is like it's not just more output, but it's less input.
Yeah,
It's both at the same time, and that's the thing I have to tell people is like it's about efficiency, and efficiency is the ratio of input to output. You want less input and you want more output. So if you find yourself, saving a whole week and yet you're closing 3 times as many deals, I mean, yeah, on both ends of that equation, you've killed it. That's what you're looking
right.
for.
Exactly. I would just replace the word efficiency with another E word, effectiveness. Because we can efficiently waste our time spamming more people by using AI, but it's not effective. And so effective outreach, effective engagement feels less efficient. But
Yeah.
in reality, I'd rather be effective and then once I figure out how to be effective, then let's be efficiently effective. But I don't want to um, optimize for efficiency because that's what's going on with the predictable revenue model right now and the annoyance at scale that's going on. They're very efficiently alienating their entire market.
Yeah, yeah, I can definitely see that. But yeah, I mean, all of that sounds very promising, and I'm over here like I'm sold. So I guess where can people find you and then your company?
Propel Growth is pretty easy to find. Just Propel Growth, and you'll get to us at propelgrowth.com. It's going to redirect to learning dot, but you don't really need to worry about that. So, and then on LinkedIn, you can find Propel Growth on LinkedIn. You can find me, Candyce Edelen, on LinkedIn. You spell my name right, I'm very easy to find. I think I'm the only one, maybe. But if you want to connect with me, please do send me a connection request saying that you heard this podcast. You will get a human to human reply from me. I will treat you with respect. I will not alienate you. We have a newsletter also with LinkedIn tips that's free. I send out a tip every week about how to use LinkedIn effectively and really how to do prospecting and inbound lead generation effectively. And then if you want to go to propelgrowth.com/podcast, I've got a couple checklists up there for how to maximize your networking effectiveness on LinkedIn and how to optimize your profile. So you might find those useful. So that'd be propelgrowth.com/podcast.
Nice. So something nice and actionable people can go to directly. Yeah, well, sounds good. It's been great having you. I think this has been a really great conversation. I at some point I'm also over here thinking like, ah, man, I wish we had gone over the other thought leadership thing we talked about before. So maybe that would be a separate podcast episode some other time.
I guess we'll have to do that. Now I'm drawing a blank on what it was. We did have a long conversation though.
Yeah, I think the idea was people were using an individual to create thought leadership, and you were talking about this new idea of like you're using the team to collaborate to create a thought
Yeah.
leadership, and that I'm still over here on the edge of my seat, like, all right, how does that one work? But that might be a whole extra episode over there.
We might have to do that because, yeah, thought leadership is a team sport. And yeah, you can't really rely on just one person to get it done. But man, if you lean in as a team, it can be amazing in terms of lifting awareness about your brand.
Yeah. Yeah, well, there's the hook for anyone who's interested, and if we see some interest there, then maybe we'll do another episode on that one because at least for me, I'd love to.
So I think that what you need to do is reach out and let us know that you actually want to hear that podcast so that Lee knows whether or not he should get me on again. It's all up to you guys.
All right. Well, thank you again, because I know I've taken over more than an hour of your time at this point, but it's been great having you on.
Been a pleasure. Thank you.
That was Candyce Edelen, CEO of Propel Growth. You can find her on LinkedIn, and you can find her company at propelgrowth.com. I'm your host, Lee Cooper, and it takes me a lot of time to put together these podcasts, so I'd love it if you only take a second to rate and review this episode on your podcast player of choice. Or if you're on YouTube, just take a second to hit the like button and subscribe to make sure you get upcoming episodes. I'll see you next time.